Ikasan online tutorials. My name is Michael Stewart and I am a core developer on the Ikasan Enterprise Integration Platform. And today we're going to be looking at the new Ikasan 4 release. An important new and necessary feature of Ikasan 4 is the automated migration of H2 databases from the previously supported version of 1.4.200 to the new version 2.2.224. The upgrade is a breaking change to the underlying database file. And databases created in version 1.4.200 are no longer compatible with the new version 2.2.224. As a result of the necessity to migrate the database file to the new version, the Ikasan shell has been enhanced to automate the process of migrating from the old to the new version. This feature will run by default for the ESB database associated with an Ikasan integration module, if the need to migrate the underlying database file is detected. If there are any other databases associated with the integration module, it is necessary to manually run the migration using the commands that are exposed by the Ikasan shell. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of a deep dive into how this feature actually works and runs through some demonstrations of how you can either use it in the automated fashion or use it from the command line if you choose to do so. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take a look at a demonstration of the H2 migration tool running against a module that I've got deployed on my local computer. This module happens to be a scheduler agent. It was initially created as a 3.3.0 version of the platform, and as a result it had the old version of the H2 database that was created for that module. So now that I've upgraded the module to Ikasan 4, it will be necessary for me to run the migration so that the H2 database file is compatible with the new version of H2. So as I've previously stated, we use the Ikasan shell in order to run this migration. Now, for the default ESB database, the migration runs in an automated fashion. So all you need to do is start your module and the shell will detect that the migration is necessary and run it in an automated fashion without you having to do anything at all. Now that is predicated on some property values being available in your property file, and I'm going to just open up the config file and we'll have a look at that and just to point out which configuration values are necessary. So if I open that config file, you can see here we've got this property value here, which is H2DB migration module persistence database path. And that's been defined as the path to my database, in this case the ESB database. The other two values that are relevant are the username and password that are used for that database. Now, in my particular environment, I'm just using the defaults because it's just my local machine. In a secure environment, you would probably have changed that from the default. Moreover, the password here in the property file will be encrypted. This is just a demonstration to show you how this works. So I'm going to quit out of that. Now, I've mentioned that this is running as part of the Ikasan shell. So the first thing I'll do, I was just going to fire up the Ikasan shell, and we're going to have a quick look and see what we've got here. So if I fire up run the Ikasan simple.shell script here, we enter into the Ikasan shell. If I type in help there, you can see what commands we've got available, and the command that we're looking at today is the migrate H2 command. So what I'm going to do is have a look at that and see what features we have, or what commands, what parameters we can pass to the command when we run it. You can see here, so migrate H2, it's responsible for migrating the H2 database. So the first command value that we can pass in is the source version of the H2 database, and it's by default is already set to 1.4.200. and the target version by default is set to 2.2.224. They're the only two source and target versions supported at the moment, because this is a new feature and this is the only upgrade path that's necessary at the moment. We can also pass in the username for the database. It is being picked up from the properties file by default, so unless we need to manually set that on the command line, we can just rely on it being picked up from these property values here. And similarly, we've got the database location, and that's once again being picked up from this particular path here. Now that's the default ESB database. So I'm just going to quit out of the shell there now, and as I've stated, in order to run the database migration for the default ESB database, all I need to do is run the start command for the Ikasan module. So if I type in Ikasan simple.sh.start, alright, so you can see there that we've got some results here that are popped out in the form of a JSON document. So there's two separate JSON documents here. The first one relates to the migration, and the second one relates to the module starting up and the PID files associated with that. So we can see here, if we look at this particular JSON document here, it says that this successfully executed the command and that the migration has worked as we'd expect it to. Now that module's starting up. While that's starting up, we're just going to have a look on the file system to see what's being created relating to this particular H2 upgrade. So if I go into the persistence directory here, you can see here what's being created is this directory here, of course, manifest migration. So if I go into the manifest migration, you can see here that what's created is this particular file here, which is basically a file that gets put onto the file system to state that the migration has occurred, so that any subsequent attempts to start this module or run the migration will not run, because the module's aware of the fact that this migration has already occurred. If we go into the database directory, you'll see that we now have our standard ESB database there running, and we've also got one here which has got some extra data or extra text appended to the end of it, which is in effect the old version of the database prior to the migration. It's got, you know, the term backup there has been appended to it, as well as the version and the timestamp of when that particular migration occurred. And we now have our new database, which has been migrated to the new version, is there, and that's what the module will be now using. So I go back to have a look at our log files. We should be able to see that that module has started up successfully, and there we go. You can see that line there. So we're now running against the new database here. Everything's happy, so there's no problem. The migration has occurred successfully. So I'm just going to stop that module now. All right, so that's stopped, and we're going to go into the shell again. So I'm just going to run the Ikasan simple command, and we open up the Ikasan shell again. I'm going to try and run migrate H2 again. And as I've pointed out, we have a manifest file in the file system that states that this migration's already run. So in an attempt to run it again, I get this message: the migration process has already been run and will not rerun. Similarly, if I try and restart the module again, so we know that the start script of the Ikasan shell automatically tries to do a migration if it's necessary. We can see this message has popped out here: the migration process has already run and will not be rerun. So all that happens now is that the module starts up in its normal fashion, it connects to the database, and it just continues to operate as we'd expect it to. So we've seen there that we've upgraded in an automated fashion the core ESB database of this particular module. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is take a look at migrating an EAI database, or another database that's not the default ESB H2 database that's used by the Ikasan platform. So we've got an EAI database associated with this module. So let's have a look in the persistence directory. You can see there we've got our EAI database. And I know that that was created on the previous version of H2 because this is an older module. As I've stated, the process for updating any database that's not the core ESB database requires a manual step. The first thing I'm going to just point out is that this module is not running. The process of running a database migration is not predicated on having the Ikasan module running. In fact, you probably don't want to start the module until you've done the migration of your EAI database. So let's fire up the Ikasan shell again and have a look. So we've got our migrate H2 here. Now, as I've said before, we need to seed this database command with the location of the database that we're going to be migrating. So that's now the EAI database. So we've got our path to where the database file lives. I've also pointed out that the username and password is being picked up by the properties file, but if I wanted to, I could also put in the username and the password. They might differ from what's being used in the ESB database, right? So that gives me the option to seed this particular command with a different set of user credentials. So I'm now going to run that migration. All right, and you can see here we've received a response to say that the migration has run successfully. If I try and run it again, it won't let me run it again because it says the migration has already been performed. So I'm going to quit out of the shell, and we'll just go into the persistence directory and see what's been created there again. So we've got our migration manifest. If I go into that directory, we can see that we now have a new manifest file created that states that the EAI database upgrade is also run. If I go into the database directory itself, we now have an EAI database, which is the migrated one, which is running on the new version of H2, and we've got a backup of the old version of the database, and that's got, once again, backup appended onto it with the version number and the timestamp of when that particular migration occurred. There's one more very important flag that needs to be highlighted that gets set on the command as a parameter when running the H2 migration upgrade. And that is this particular flag here. So H2 database is ESB database. It can be either set to true or false. Now, at the core of Ikasan, you've got the core ESB database, which is the default database that underpins all integration modules. If you are upgrading a core Ikasan database, you can either leave this value blank or set it to true, which is the default value. If you're upgrading any other databases, so your EAI database or any other database that's associated with an Ikasan integration module, this flag should be set to false. The reason is that the core Ikasan database has certain extra steps that are applied to it when the migration occurs. And you do not want those steps applied to other database instances if you are migrating those from an older version of H2. So what we've seen is the migration of the EAI database as well as the migration of the ESB database. In a real-world scenario, the way that if my module had an EAI database, the way that I would approach this migration would be to run the EAI database migration manually first, and then just start the module and let the module run the ESB database in an upgrade in an automated fashion, and then basically your module should start cleanly, and you're in business. You've migrated to the latest version of H2, and there's nothing else necessary from a manual intervention perspective. Now, all of the details relating to the Ikasan shell are available online in the Ikasan GitHub pages. We've got some README files which describes all of the various commands that are available as part of the shell, and in detail, specifically what we're talking about here, we've got the details of the H2 migration functionality that's available. So that basically outlines how to run H2 migration as part of the Ikasan shell. Well, thank you very much for tuning into Ikasan Online Tutorials. If you'd like further information on the Ikasan Enterprise Integration Platform, go to github.com/ikasaneip. That's lowercase ikasan uppercase EIP. All the links will be in the descriptions of the videos associated with the Ikasan Online Tutorials. And if you've liked what you've seen today, please subscribe to the Ikasan Online Tutorial YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.